all began on the first Sunday of September 2025. It's my favorite season, back to school, new plans, and that endlessly familiar feeling of, I wish I could play a good MMO. So that's how it happened. I finally gave in and for the first time in my life installed Old School RuneScape. And I'm so glad I did. This series will follow my experiences in the world of OSRS. The video was made after I completed the game's first adventure path, a questline designed for beginners to introduce them to the game's systems and world. But before we dive in, let me share a bit of my background in the world of online role-playing games. I started in 2004 with the legendary MMO Star Wars Galaxies. I still remember it vividly. I barely spoke English, but I managed to convince my parents it was a brilliant idea because I could learn English while playing. Okay, my dad was a huge Star Wars fan, so it didn't take too much convincing. Still, it was a subscription-based game, so it made the perfect Christmas gift. Not long after, I broke my leg in a silly school accident and I missed 6 weeks of school. Needless to say, I didn't study a minute and spent my entire recovery playing Star Wars Galaxies. A childhood friend of mine was already playing World of Warcraft, and one day I went over to his place to see what it was all about. I particularly wet myself just watching the trailer, and it didn't take long to convince my parents to get me WoW for Christmas of 2005. From then on, the MMO train had no brakes. Thanks to over 10 years of World of Warcraft and other MMOs, I learned English really well and pretty much ignored every other aspect of my life. Then, as you grow up, university, work, relationships come along, and you have less and less time to play. Luckily, I work in this field. Though, I'd like to point out that anyone who thinks game testing is just playing games is seriously mistaken. But more on that in a future video. So I was looking for something that respects the time and energy you put into it. A few weeks ago, a big wave started among WoW Classic players migrating to the world of Old School RuneScape. To be honest, I've only loosely following this trend, so it didn't really influence my decision. But I have to say, I am thoroughly enjoying this old school sandbox MMO. I remember in the early 2000s, my friends and I used to hang out at a place called Hiffy Club, which pretty much changed my life. If by any chance the owner is watching this video, Pishta, thank you for everything. The time I spent there ranks among the best memories of my childhood. RuneScape was already popular among the regulars back then, but I never managed to dive into it. It looked ugly, I didn't speak enough English, and it ran in a browser. Ugh. Compared to Star Wars Galaxies, Guild Wars 1, and World of Warcraft, it seemed downright primitive. But I quickly came to realize that the game we used to mock as Pixel Dragon was actually something special. Of course, these realizations come at different times for everyone, but nearly 20 years later, it feels amazing. So let's get into what I think after roughly 15 hours of OSRS. As I delve deeper into the world of indie games, I increasingly realize that graphics aren't everything. I've never been the type to play a game solely for its visuals, but over time, this belief solidified, especially when a game's graphic perfectly reflects its mood. Upon launching OSRS, we are greeted by what can be best described as X-chiseled graphics, with vibrant colors and honest, authentic design choices. The animation and effects are rough around the edges, but that's exactly what gives the world its unique charm and atmosphere. The music captivated me from the very first moment. I'm a big fan of the dungeon synth genre, which evolved mainly from the soundscapes of old games and tabletop role-playing game. RuneScape's soundtrack sits somewhere between cheerful dungeon synth and polyphonic party vibes. It's simply perfect. The game features such brilliantly composed tracks that I feel like it's become the OST of my life. Even today, I caught myself listening to it while working, dancing along despite not playing. The developers are British, so the English humor is palpable in nearly every line. Witty responses, engaging writing, and clever twists characterize the tutorials, quests, and NPC dialogue. I remember going years without reading quest texts in World of Warcraft since they mostly boiled down to kill X, bring back Y. But here, you don't stand a chance unless you read the quests, and I think that's genius. What's even better is that you want to read them because the whole vibe is so enjoyable you wouldn't want to miss out. Even the tutorial had my attention well, and I found myself chuckling here and there. Then I started chatting with NPCs, especially Adventurer John, and I loved every moment of it. One thing that makes a bit of getting used to it is that all interactions happen in a tiny chat box, so the usual speech bubbles, pop-ups, and similar UI elements aren't really present here. But after a few minutes, you get used to it, and I don't think it detracts from the experience at all. And here's another brilliant example. When your character dies for the first time, Death himself greets you in his little office and explains what's going on. He tells you that you have 15 minutes to retrieve your items from your grave. It will cost a bit of money, but you can reduce the cost of future deaths by giving him an item to store in his little chest, though the item must be worth at least 10,000 gold, so... Right after the tutorial, I dove straight into the action. After chatting with John, I began leveling up my skills. The beginner adventure path takes all combat skills up to level 20 and the 3 most basic gathering skills up to level 5. Of course, anyone raised on modern MMOs, especially younger players, might rightly ask, is the gameplay really just standing in front of enemies and wrecking each other while a progress bar fills up? Or standing by a riverbank fishing until your inventory is full? And honestly, yes. It's not action-packed, that's for sure, but the pacing is excellent. Each level unlocks something new for your character, and you can level your skills in whatever order you like. Personally, I had a great time filling my inventory with chopped logs and then lighting fires from one each, ending up with about 15 campfires lined up side by side. This is another example of what I mentioned earlier. OSRS doesn't take itself too seriously. That's actually what started to bother me about WoW after a while. I decided I wouldn't pay for the game until I tried all the free content, so naturally there are a few skills I cannot access. If that were all the game had to offer, I would probably lose interest quickly, but this is where things get really interesting. Some skills work like in most MMOs. You gather X amount of materials, go to the right location, and windows pop up, and boom, crafting begins. But in many cases, you have to manually combine items in your inventory or use one item on another that's active for a limited time. For example, you drag the fire making tool onto a chopped log in your inventory to create a campfire. Then you drag a raw meat onto the fire and a little message pops up in the chat box asking how many you want to cook. Or take the baking bread for example. You need flour and water, but you also need something to hold the water, so first you need a jug. These are small details, but I think they really set RuneScape apart from most conventional MMOs and add a lot to the gameplay experience. The same goes for the item usage. It's full of quirky little messages. For example, you get a genie lamp during the gathering part of the beginner adventure. When you try to store it in your bank, you get a message saying some mysterious force is preventing you from doing so. What do you think about these little touches in games? Do they win you over too? I decided to follow the game's advice to the letter and didn't start a single quest until I had completed the recommended beginner adventure path. So I grinded and grinded, while multitasking of course. I have to mention that OSRS, thanks to its systems and design, is perfectly playable alongside other activities. watching videos, listening to music, writing scripts for videos, or even while working. I leveled up my defense, strength, attack, and range skills to level 20. Magic, we will talk about it later. In the meantime, I buried more bones than a gravedigger in a week and cooked more meat than I cared to admit. My girlfriend wasn't too thrilled about me slaying innocent frogs and rats, but hey, if that's the task, what choice does a rookie adventurer have? My skills steadily climbed, and I have to say, there is something addictive about watching that little progress bar grow next to each skill icon. What surprised me was that your character gains more health the more they fight and get hit. Makes sense, but it's a bit unusual, at least for me. Eventually, I ran out of runes and couldn't level up my magic anymore, so I dove into quests. There's a bunch you can do without a subscription, so I checked the list. The cook's assistant quest caught my eye. It seemed like the perfect first quest for a new adventurer, and it absolutely was. I spoke to the cook in the castle, who told me it was the ruler's birthday, but he forgot to bake a cake and didn't have the ingredients. So I went out and brought him an egg, flour and milk. But it's not just a simple go here, click that kind of quest. And I had to bring or buy containers too, because you cannot just grab milk or flour without something to hold them. I found an egg at the farm, ground some grain into flour, got a pot to store it, milked the right cow and poured it into a jug. Brought everything back and the quest was complete. It might sound silly, but this everyday quest took several minutes and I enjoyed every second of it. Then I browsed through more quests, but most of the ones that interested me required a bit more experience. So I explored the map and spoke to the ruler in the castle, who asked me to deliver a talisman to the wizard's tower. I had no idea what was coming, but secretly hoped it would solve my rune shortage, and luckily it did. The Grand Wizard was thrilled with the talisman and sent me to a nearby city to speak with the rune merchant, who explained that I now had access to the long-forgotten essence mine, where I can craft runes. Brilliant! And all the NPCs had hilarious dialogue along the way. I bought some runes and finally completed the entire beginner adventure path, all 18 tasks. But the real highlight quest was still ahead. I spotted a quest from a woman named Abigail. She talked about a boat and an island where her friends were killed and she barely escaped. Oddly, she said she didn't know what happened to her friend who was sitting right next to her. When I clicked on him, Abigail spoke again. Weird. Anyway, I hopped into a boat and sailed to the island. What followed was a classic early 2000s horror movie setup. Iconic mask, bloody knife, long monologues, and cryptic notes. I solved the first two puzzles fairly quickly. I stabbed a painting that looked different from the others to get a key, lit a fuse, but the room was too damp, so I had to light candles to dry it out. At that point, I was blown away. If only more MMOs had quests like this. It was getting late and my brain wasn't firing on all cylinders. I had to play 4 notes on the piano based on a clue. I fixated on the word fate and I thought the voiced counterpart of T was D, so I played FADE thinking I nailed it. Nope. A quick OSRS wiki search revealed the correct answer was dead. D-E-A-D. Genius. I loved it. The final riddle used the first and last letters of each clue. The word heart led me to the fireplace and I had to arrange gemstones based on the last letters of the current sentences. Then came the showdown. I used a mirror to reflect light and damaged the killer 3 times. Turns out Abigail was the murderer all along, jealous of adventurers like me stealing her spotlight. Well, okay. Her friend has been helping her the whole time, but eventually turned on each other and she killed him. Then, in a dramatic twist, she tried to take me out too. But wait, her final victim had a rare condition. Her heart was on the right side, so she survived the stab wound. She grabbed a massive sword from the kitchen and absolutely wrecked Abigail. Whew! So yeah, that's what happened during my first 15 hours of Old School RuneScape. Honestly, I don't think I have ever had this much fun for doing quests in an MMO. The skill leveling and item usage are truly unique and incredibly addictive. I've caught myself thinking about where to go next, what to level, which quest to pick, and whether I should subscribe. But no, I'm strong. I will endure the slow running and limited skills until I've tried everything that's free. So what do you think of Old School RuneScape based on the video? Would you try it? Are you already playing and clicked because of that? I'm super curious to hear your thoughts, so don't hold back in the comments.